Margaret Anderson had been married to Robert for 32 years. 32 years of quiet breakfasts, shared silences, and a love that had settled into something comfortable, like well-worn slippers. She was 61 when he passed, her hair more silver than black now, her hands showing the years of tending their home, their garden, their life together. Robert's funeral was held on a crisp October morning. The leaves were turning gold and red, just the way he'd always loved. Margaret stood by his casket in her black dress, accepting condolences with grace, though her heart felt hollow as an empty shell. Their daughter Emily came with her husband David. They'd been married 5 years. A good match, everyone said. But Margaret noticed something that day. Something cold in Emily's eyes when she looked at her mother. Something calculated. As mourners filed past, Emily leaned close to Margaret's ear. Her voice was barely a whisper, sweet as poison honey. "Don't worry, mother. You're not in the will. After 30 years of marriage, you get absolutely nothing." Margaret's breath caught. She turned to look at her daughter, but Emily had already moved away, her face a mask of appropriate grief for the other mourners. The words echoed in Margaret's mind throughout the service. Not in the will. Absolutely nothing. It couldn't be true, could it? Robert had always handled their finances. He told her not to worry, that everything was taken care of. She trusted him completely. Isn't that what love was? Trust? 3 days later, they gathered in the lawyer's office. Jonathan Pierce had been Robert's attorney for 20 years, a dignified man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Margaret sat in a leather chair, her hands folded in her lap. Emily and David sat across from her. The air felt thick, heavy with anticipation. Jonathan opened the will and began to read. Robert's voice seemed to echo from the pages. Small bequests to charities, his golf clubs to his brother, his watch collection to his nephew. Margaret listened, waiting for her name. Then Jonathan's voice changed slightly. He was reaching the final page. And finally, to my daughter Emily, who has shown such devotion and care, I leave my entire estate, including the family home, all bank accounts, investments, and personal property. Margaret felt the room tilt. Emily had been right. After 32 years, she was getting nothing. But Jonathan wasn't finished. However, he continued, his voice growing stronger. This bequest comes with one condition that must be read aloud in the presence of all beneficiaries. Emily leaned forward, a small smile playing at her lips. Jonathan turned to the last page. His eyes widened slightly. He cleared his throat and began to read. Emily, you told me 3 years ago that you couldn't wait for me to die so you could sell the house and travel the world. You said your mother had wasted my money on foolish things like charity and kindness. You asked me to cut her out of the will entirely. You said she didn't deserve anything because she never worked a real job, never contributed financially. The room went silent. Emily's face drained of color. Jonathan continued, his voice steady. What you didn't know, my dear daughter, is that your mother worked 2 jobs to put me through medical school. She cleaned houses and waited tables while pregnant with you, so I could study. Every success I achieved, I owed to her sacrifice. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She'd never wanted recognition for those years. She'd done it out of love. You also didn't know that I recorded our conversation that day. I've spent these 3 years watching you, Emily. Watching how you treated your mother when you thought I wasn't looking. The rolled eyes, the dismissive comments, the way you avoided her calls. Emily's husband David was staring at her, his face a mixture of shock and disgust. Therefore, Jonathan read, I leave everything to Emily, with this condition. She must care for her mother in our family home for the next 5 years. She must provide Margaret with respect, comfort, and genuine kindness. If at any point Margaret feels unwelcome or mistreated, the entire estate transfers to the hospice charity where your mother volunteered for 20 years. Jonathan looked up from the page. Additionally, Margaret has the right to remain in the home for the rest of her life, regardless of what Emily decides. The house cannot be sold while Margaret lives. And Margaret, my darling wife, I've left you a separate trust fund that Jonathan has managed privately. It's worth $2.3 million. It's yours alone, no conditions. The silence in the room was deafening. Emily's mouth opened and closed. David stood up and walked out without a word. Margaret heard his car start in the parking lot moments later. There's a final note, Jonathan said quietly, looking at Margaret with warmth. It says, "Margaret, my love, I'm sorry I never told you about the trust. I wanted you to know that I saw you, truly saw you, every day of our marriage. Your kindness wasn't weakness. Your generosity wasn't foolishness. You were, and remain, the finest person I've ever known. Live well, my darling. You've earned every penny, and so much more." Margaret wept not from sadness, but from being seen. Really seen. Emily sat frozen, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. She'd gambled on her father's love being blind. She'd lost everything that mattered in the winning. As Margaret left the lawyer's office that day, she felt lighter than she had in years, not because of the money, though it would bring security and peace, but because Robert had known. He'd always known, and he'd loved her not despite her kindness, but because of it. She thought about forgiveness, about whether Emily deserved another chance, perhaps in time. But for now, Margaret had her own life to live. A life she'd earned through sacrifice, love, and grace. She drove to the hospice where she'd volunteered for so many years and made a donation in Robert's name. Then she went home, to the house that would always be hers, and made herself a cup of tea. Outside, the autumn leaves continued their gentle fall, and Margaret smiled. Sometimes love's greatest gift is teaching us that we've always been enough.